Good evening. Welcome to When I'm 64. I'm Jay Cleary. When I'm 64 is brought to you by the Breakfast Exchange Club of Greater Haverhill, a group of men and women working together to benefit older adults residing in our community through educational opportunities, community service projects, and direct funding for unmet needs. Tonight's segment is another of Lost Haverhill, and this is really lost and gone. It's about Birchbrow, a mansion located on the shores of Lake Saltonstall, known today as Plug Pond, owned by one Thomas Sanders, who was the treasurer of the Bell Telephone Company, a friend of Alexander Graham Bell, and a shoe manufacturer, a leather manufacturer in Haverhill. It's a fascinating show because my guest tonight is Jan Cleversey, who not only was born at Birchbrow, but her father worked there and her family spent time living in Birchbrow before the building was lost and gone forever. Janice, thanks for joining me.
It's nice to see you here.
Jan Cleversey wrote a paper in 1980.
Correct.
As part of a class at Northern Essex?
Yes.
About Birchbrow. Now, Birchbrow, for those who don't know about it, we'll learn a lot about it tonight in Mr. Sanders. But you want to tell us just a little how you got interested in this whole subject?
I was working at Western Electric, put 31 years in there, and I knew how important Thomas Sanders was to the telephone industry. And when I got in college, I chose that as a thesis for my English class. And it was worth every bit of my time because what I found out was unanswered questions that I never realized how important Thomas Sanders really was to the telephone that we use today. Put up the money for the invention, working with Alexander Graham Bell. And Alexander Graham Bell took care of Thomas Sanders' needs because Thomas Sanders' firstborn son was deaf, and Alexander taught him sign language and was able to give him an open door to his education. I guess he was quite a brilliant young man. And it was just so many stories that my mother and father would tell us about it, but I had to find out more. So I spent many hours putting this paper together for college, and it was very, very interesting.
And we've got a number of photographs that Jan has brought with her tonight for this program as a result of her research and study. A number of the photographs are courtesy of the special collections at the Haverhill Public Library, but we'll go through those photographs tonight to kind of give you a story of a fascinating individual, Thomas Sanders. He was born August 18th, 1839 in Salem, Massachusetts, but he married a woman from Haverhill on June 6, 1866, the year after the Civil War ended, and her name was Susan Bradley Porter, and they had a family of 7 children. And as we get through the program tonight, Janice will show us some of the photographs, not only of Mr. Sanders, but also of his wife, and talk a little bit about the family. But the more interesting part of this show, and we'll talk about this maybe just at the outset, you were born at Birchbrow, along with a couple of your siblings.
That's correct.
And your family lived there, as well as your father worked there as kind of the forestry man, or
Yes.
the woodcutter.
Yeah. Someone had to feed the fireplaces in that large mansion, and the woods was available. And my father, certainly he and other men that worked there, cut the wood down for all the fireplaces. And they also had central heat that was also, he'd used, the fuel was wood. And so it was quite an undertaking. And yeah, we were there for about 4 years, I believe it was. And it was just such I have many memories, vague memories, but I do have the knowledge through conversations with my parents and my older brother and sisters, yes.
We'll put on the screen right now a couple of maps just to show people where Birchbrow was located. The first photo on the screen I took from a 1893 map of Haverhill that I have in my office. And I found very interestingly there was a specific section of the map where it's written Birchbrow, Thomas Sanders. So somebody in 1893 thought that Mr. Sanders was so significant and important that they actually added the name of Mr. Sanders as well as his home and outlined it in this map. So that's pretty interesting. The second map is one that you've found, Jan, and that's Ward 4 in Haverhill, and it shows you Birchbrow and the land owned by Thomas Sanders, and it shows the outline of the house.
Houses, there were
The
4
houses,
dwellings, yes.
yeah, as well
Yeah.
as the huge stable or a barn, or your
Yes.
brother said it was more than a barn.
Yes.
And so that gives us an idea of exactly where it was located in Belvedere, which was a section of
Right.
the city.
Right, as you come in off of Mill Street, Belvedere Heights is to your right at the entrance of what was known as Sanders Road, I guess,
Sanders Road.
at one time. And Belvedere Heights was right there at the right-hand area of that entrance to it.
And
Yes.
so that was a very fashionable part of Haverhill.
Oh,
but
very much so,
But
yeah.
that's where he built the mansion. Maybe you could give us a little background. We're going to show you a couple of photographs of Thomas Sanders. First of all, as a young man, and the first one is a lithograph that I took from a book about the Haverhill Board of Trade, and it shows Thomas Sanders, and it has his signature underneath. And then we have a second photograph followed up, also of Thomas Sanders, with the brown beard, the dark hair. He looks like maybe he's in his 30s or 40s in those two photographs. So that's what he looked like as a young man. And he had a shoe industry in Haverhill, and maybe we could talk a little bit about his shoe business or his leather company in Haverhill, if you would, Jan.
Well, I think most importantly about his business was the fact that he introduced the pre-measuring and pre-cutting. As we know, industry today, there's a lot of prep work for a lot of, no matter what business you're in, whether it's food or machinery or whatever it is. And he kind of, from what I have read in his history, that he kind of was not the inventor, so to speak, but he was a teacher in that system of pre-cut fabrics and whatever. Right. And I guess it was very, very popular, and it certainly helped the other people who were in the shoe industry to copy that same process, and was able to have all of these different leather businesses in the city who did so well with that.
Sure.
It was just a wonderful, I would use the word invention for that, yes.
He revolutionized
yes, he did, yes.
Shoe
Yeah.
industry in terms of leather cutting. Maybe we could...
And he had many buildings throughout the Washington Street, Merrimack Street area.
And let's show some of those buildings on the
sure.
screen right now. You've brought a number of photographs
Yeah.
of Mr. Sanders' Leather Company. The first photograph shows, looks like it's the Washington block right down in Washington Square. It's now Haverhill Housing Authority opposite the plaza. And you said that was where one of his first businesses was. Then we've got a second photograph with a little bit of an arch on the top of it, with a group of men standing in front of a shoe shop that says Thomas Sanders right on the sign above it.
That was in the Washington block. That was the Bootery, yes.
The Bootery.
Yeah.
And I looked closely at that sign. In the window it says T. Sanders Cut Sole Leather, so that was his business. The Haverhill Board of Trade had a book, and in the book they talked about the Sanders Leather Company, and I'll just read a paragraph from that. It said, recognizing that in the numerous special lines of manufacture in the city, there was a demand for every part of the leather, if each could be put where it belonged, Mr. Sanders, in 1870, started the business of sole leather cutting on a large scale, driving the entering wedge, which has since revolutionized the system of manufacture in this city. So that's exactly what you had talked about, and it was written up in a book for the Haverhill Board of Trade. Got another photograph that's kind of interesting of the house, and that photograph, not of the house, but again, is of the building on Washington Street, and it was a lithograph. And let's take a look at that, also from the Haverhill Board of Trade book. And if you look closely, maybe you could comment on that, Jan. It says Sanders Leather Company right above the sign.
Right, and
Very
it's right where
interesting.
the railroad station is now.
Yep,
And in fact, that was on the ground level as the building.
right.
And that had to have been something to see.
Yeah, and so as we look at that picture, I'm thinking, looking at that photograph, or that lithograph rather, you can see the trains right alongside the building. So that location today, I think, would be the driveway that goes down behind the tap.
Yes.
Because that's where the elevated train tracks are today. So it would have been in that space.
Yeah.
And the building, looks like the building right next to it, and we're going to have that picture on the screen next, the Currier-Sanders block, which is still downtown
There,
on Washington
yes.
Street where
Where the Bluefin is.
Bluefin
Yeah,
is
yes.
and Sons of Italy is.
Yes.
And so the similarity between his building that was in the lithograph that was 2 bays and the Currier-Sanders block, which is 4 bays, is really remarkable. And that's where he ended up, and it's the Currier-Sanders block to this day,
Yes.
named
And
after
it's still
him.
standing. Imagine that, Jay.
It's still standing, and it's been well preserved too.
Yes, yes.
And it's a beautiful building. It's an absolutely beautiful building. So let's talk about, if we could, maybe a little bit about Mr. Sanders' family. You've got some photographs here of his mother.
His mother,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. And his mother, his
Get another-
wife,
His wife, Susan Bradley Howe.
right? His mother's name was Mary Ann Brown from Salem, Mass. And Susan Bradley Howe.
And that's
And
his wife.
Yes, his
Yep.
wife.
And then as we talk a little bit more, you've got some other photographs. One
had-
is of his son,
Yeah, he had 7 children.
7 children.
But in my findings, I only come up with the names of 3 of them. In fact, it's amazing that his son George was the one that introduced himself and Alexander Graham Bell. But there's no pictures of George
Right.
anywhere. I have a picture of Charles.
Let's take a look at that. There's
Okay.
a picture of Charles on the screen. And on the back of that photograph, I noticed it came from the Public Library Special Collections. Somebody had written in pencil, it may have been the last photograph taken in Birchbrow.
That's correct.
So that's pretty
Yes.
amazing.
That is amazing. And the other pictures of his family that I have are of his daughter Muriel. And there is no picture of Nathaniel at all. And those are the three siblings that his
Familiar with?
Right, familiar with, and any information that was in the library. And it's amazing, out of 7 children, that there's not any more information than what we have found. You know?
Yeah, wouldn't it be interesting if somebody could take the time someday to do a genealogy search? I suppose you could, to see, having 7 children, I would imagine, but it may not be the case, that there might be some descendants of Thomas Sanders that are still alive, and
Yeah.
where they are and where they ended up.
And where would you go for that, Jay?
I think you'd have to actually almost go online and start doing a genealogy search, or even start at Special Collections in Haverhill and look up. He died apparently in 1917, according to one of the calendars from the Public Library. So you need to look up where he died, who handled his estate, who his descendants were, who his heirs were, and you go from there. I think it'd be quite a bit of work, but it'd be an interesting task if somebody ever had the time to undertake it. If we could, let's talk about your father and your mother and your family and some of the stories.
Okay.
I mean, it's amazing that this absolutely gorgeous mansion on Lake Saltonstall.
Well, through my research, I found out that there's probably a link of how we went there at all. And that is through my cousins, Herbert and Florence Ryan. They were there prior to my family being there. And I think the link was that my father, being a carpenter, he was a Finnish carpenter. My father helped build Fort Devens in World War I. And so him being a carpenter, automatically my family, my cousins must have said, well, I'll get my cousin to come down and chop some of the trees.
Sure.
Well, that's how I think how it all happened. My
Yeah.
family came from Salem, New Hampshire. And the 3, myself and my 2 younger brothers, were the 3 that were born there at Birchbrow. However, there were so many stories to be told, and one of them was how my family would have to switch off in seasons. It would appear that Thomas Sanders and his wife and family would live in Florida for the winter.
So this was their summer house, Birchbrow.
Right.
Yeah.
And my parents would move into the what they called the big house.
The big house.
Mansion was called the big house, and they would care for it through the winter. And then they would come home, the Sanders would come home, and my parents would live, and family would move into the farmhouse. And then if they had any other people coming, they would move us out of there. And, well, when we were in the mansion, there were servants' quarters, and that's where we lived. We were not, my brothers and sisters tell me we were never allowed in all of the rooms. And then they had a building called the Slate Cottage, and that was another place that guests would stay. We stayed there for a while, I guess, too.
Wow.
It was just so interesting, I'm telling you, and that place is so beautiful up there. I just wish that someone could do something, because as a child, I did have some memories of different things, and I cannot recall them right now.
Right, right.
Just these things that come in and out of my memory.
Yeah.
But back in the 1940s, we went on a typical picnic day at Plug Pond. It was never called Lake Saltonstall at that time in my life. This was the early 40s, and the sadness was that this picture behind us, when I went there, that beautiful hand-carved oak table was gone.
Oh, really? Yeah.
All around the peripheral area of the room there were drawers, beautiful oak drawers that would hold the linens and all of that for the servants to use, and glass, tiles, some of the brick was taken out. It was all over the floor. The windows on either side of the front entrance were broken and all of this. So it was a very, very, very devastating. And I never really found out how all that came about, but it seems as though it was just left wide open for anybody's
Kids
taking.
or whatever to walk in and start
Yeah,
stripping it.
yeah.
Let's take a look. We've got some photos that you brought along with you. There's a couple photos here. We'll start with the road to Birchbrow, and then we'll give people a view of the house itself.
Yes.
But here's a photo taken in 1905. It was in the public library's calendar, the road to Birchbrow. And it shows, it's this one right here.
Yes,
Yep.
I don't have, this is not the same one.
No,
yeah.
but this one we're looking at shows the road leading up right along the edge of the lake. There's a little stream, and in the far distance on the left-hand side, you can see in this picture the mansion, as well as it looks like the barn or the big stable building behind it. And the trees are all laid out along the road, the Sanders Road, heading up to Birchbrow, and it's just a great picture. And then you've got a second photo, the entrance road to Birchbrow, and we'll just take a look at that photo.
Yeah.
Also, another photograph showing on your way to get to Birchbrow. And now let's talk about the house itself, because you've got some great photos. Maybe we could go through those.
I have a photo of the building as it was being constructed. I thought it looked like it was in destruction, but I was told it was in construction. Because the whole hill is, you can see the area is
Not quite finished
barren,
off.
but there's a few trees.
Yeah.
And the other ones that I have, when it was completed, and
Now
it's
that
just
picture-
exquisite.
This picture taken in 1910 that we're looking at, the architect's name was William R. Emerson. He was from Boston. $300,000. Can you imagine what $300,000 was in 1880 to build a house, that money today?
Oh, yeah.
It said the house had 33 rooms, was situated on the shore of Lake Saltonstall facing Mill Street, and somebody recalled that the house appeared to be ablaze when the sunset reflected off the picture windows. So it was perfectly situated to catch the sunset as well. Huh?
There was a solarium.
Solarium room?
The room that was the music room and library was a solarium because it had probably maybe a 30-foot window in it,
Imagine
picture
that.
window, that would look out over, when you showed that road, how it would look right out over the Lake Saltonstall.
Lake Saltonstall. Also, let's take a look at one of the interior photos. And the one we're looking at, which is behind our back, that's an interesting one. Now, that was called the reception room, I believe?
Right,
The
yes, it
reception
was,
hall?
yes.
And I'm looking at that photograph. The woodwork, the carving on the right-hand side as you go up the stairs, it's kind of a swirl pattern for the pillars, then
Yes.
just not straight up
Yeah,
and down.
yeah.
So and there's a grandfather's clock. You can barely see it on
Yes,
the right-hand
yeah.
side up on the landing. And then just looking at the brickwork around the fireplace where it's curved, the masonry work and is just
I believe there were wood carvings around that, too. I don't know how they affixed that to that brick, but it was, if I recall, wood there, yeah.
And you've got oriental rugs, as you
Yes.
said, carved oak desks, beautiful chairs. Lighting is unbelievable at that point in time. Just a grand
Yeah.
mansion.
Yes.
So when your mother told stories of the house, did she say anything in particular about, some of the people she met there, or just working there?
My family and friends would come, and it was like they would stay forever, you know,
Yeah.
like the man who came to dinner, you know.
Sure.
It was a place to spend a weekend,
Yeah.
and it was a fun place.
Yeah.
A lot of activity, even though it was secluded like that, there was a lot of outdoor activity.
Right.
Anybody who wanted to hunt, I'm sure, did, you know, and
Yep.
skiing and sledding. And
Right.
yeah, and it was,
And you mentioned the proximity to Winnie Kinney. There was a bridle path. and
Yes.
He rode horses.
yes, I have a picture
In
of
fact,
his.
let's take a look at that picture. That's a great photograph.
This is a picture of his barn or stable, whatever you would have called it.
Massive
because-
building, wasn't
right.
it, Jan?
Yes, it was. My oldest brother Wally said it was a very unique building. It was not just called a barn. It was very tastefully built.
Tastefully designed
yeah,
architecture.
mhm.
And so there he is standing there with a horse.
Yes.
And,
Yep.
and let's take a look at a second photo, once again with horses and wagons, and that's kind of an older Thomas Sanders.
With
and
his
that,
white
that
beard,
photo,
yes.
Yeah, with the white beard.
Yeah.
But there he is right in front of the house, right in front of Birchbrow, in a very nice carriage, too, I might
beautiful.
add.
Yeah,
So-
probably from the Amesbury Carriage House.
That's right,
Carriage
exactly.
place, right?
And now the third picture on the screen, this is a wood engraving
Yes. Yep.
of the house. So this house had such detail and was so well known that somebody actually made a wood engraving of it.
Exactly.
Gorgeous. So we're now going to take a look at the music room, and let's talk about that, if you would.
I saw that when I was about 10 years old,
Mm-hmm.
when we took that picnic day up there. And I was so, as a child, I was just aghast because the fireplace had imported Dutch tiles and they were smashed. You could
Delft
see where
tiles? Oh,
they
God.
just took something and whacked them
Yeah.
in ruination. And a lot of chairs turned upside down and broken and everything. But the solarium window was still, I was surprised that was still in one piece.
What a sin,
And,
huh? Just to
yeah,
walk in
yes.
there must have made you sick.
Yeah, from a child's eyes, I
Sure.
just couldn't believe it.
This picture was from 1900, so that
Yes.
was in the
Oh,
heydays. The
yes.
house was only 20
Yeah,
years old.
Yeah, but look at the ceilings.
Yeah, the ceilings in that
Yeah.
photograph are something, aren't they?
Those look like wooden tiles on that ceiling.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention the piano on the
Oh,
right-hand
yes,
side.
yeah, yeah.
Beautiful
Oh, it had all
photograph.
kinds of musical instruments. My oldest brother Wally used to take the fiddle and play it.
Oh, really?
He
Yeah.
couldn't play, but I'm sure he.
Yeah, he
and
tried
he said
to.
he would go out on the balcony.
Mhm.
He would go out on the balcony,
Balcony
near
of the
that,
house?
up over the solarium.
Yeah.
Yes, and stand up there and play.
Isn't that great?
Yes, that's great.
Here's another photograph around 1945 as we're getting towards the end of the reign of Birchbrow. And there's a photograph there. But the interesting thing in that photo is to look at the automobile. Because the automobile in that picture is a 1930s style automobile.
Yes, it is.
So while we've been looking at the pictures of Birchbrow, we've gone from Thomas Sanders standing with his horse, then one with the horse and buggy, and then we've got another photo from 1910 showing what I'd call an old flivver, or looked like a Model T type
Yes,
car.
yes.
We'll show that picture next. And then we've got this one in 1945 showing a more recent automobile.
Now, my oldest brother, Wally, once again mentioned that he, in the later years, when the horses were not there, when we were there, there
Yeah.
were no horses there.
Right.
That they had cars, unique cars, and motorcycles and bicycles.
Wow.
And,
A little bit of everything.
yeah.
And that's the, I also, we're getting down to about
Muriel.
5 minutes. Let's talk about your return when you went back there in 2004, because you've brought some nice pictures.
Oh, it was so sad to see.
We can show you that. But, oh, excuse me, before we go to that,
Oh, yeah.
how about the picture of you and your
My sister Priscilla.
sister?
Yeah, that was some picture, I'll tell you.
That was 1940s?
1940s, yes, yeah, because we moved away from there in 1940, so I had
40s.
been about 3 years old, I guess it
Okay, so
was,
that
yeah, 3
taken
or
at
4.
Birchbrow.
Yeah.
And there's one other family photo, and maybe you could share that with us.
Oh, yes, my brother Niles, my brother Melvin, my sister Priscilla, and myself.
And that was
Out
taken,
in front of the car barn.
Isn't that
Yeah,
great?
Yeah, we'll go from horse barn to car
car
barn.
barn. So let's look
That's
at,
what they referred to.
let's look at these beautiful pictures that were taken in the fall, obviously in the fall of October 2004.
My nephew, Mark Clevacy,
Mm-hmm.
he's an outdoorsman, and I asked him one day, you have to do me a favor. And it was on that day I asked him the favor, he said, let's do it right now. So we did.
Yeah.
I put on sneakers and whatever, and he said that he had never been up there. And I said, I can only tell you, If you follow the road
You'll
that's
find
closest to the water,
Yeah.
we're going to find it.
Yeah.
And we did get a little diversion. I guess it was because of the loop that was
Mm-hmm.
up there. It was like a original cul-de-sac, so
Mm-hmm.
to speak. And but we found it, and
Wanna
yeah,
show
that's a
us?
lovely lake picture
Yeah.
there. I took these photos. I'm proud of them.
Yep, the one of the
And
birch, it looks
the
like
silver
fingers or,
birch, yeah.
or
Those are the root systems of the trees.
it looks like
yeah.
a large fingers coming
Yes,
out of
yeah.
an enormous hand.
And because of the denseness of the woods themselves, I was unable to get back far enough to take a full picture
Yep.
of that.
We've
And
got-
then the rest of it is just the buildings as they decayed.
Yep.
Those are the front steps of the mansion.
Yeah, we're down to about 2 minutes, so
Okay.
we've got the front steps, but there's a great picture of you standing right in the foundation with a piece of cut stone. Looks like
Yes.
granite there,
Yes,
Janice.
yeah. So it's a sad depiction of a place that's so beautiful. And I
The
just hope.
foundation is left, and that's
Yeah.
about it, huh?
Yeah, but the 4 foundations are there, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was, and as you can see, homeless have gone up there and made their own little cubby holes up
Sure,
there.
sure.
And I can understand why, how pristine for homeless people to live in a
Right.
beautiful spot like that.
Well, you've really brought a fascinating story to When I'm 64 tonight, not only
Thank
because
you,
of your
Jay.
family connection, but the story of Thomas Sanders, the fact that he was the financier of Bell Telephone. treasurer of Bell Telephone.
$100,000, I guess it
Yep.
was.
And your family's got the connection because you lived there, you were born there. And I just want to thank you for bringing the pictures, the history, and the story to us tonight. It's been a great story and a wonderful half hour.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jan. For When I'm 64, I'm Jay Cleary. I hope you enjoyed tonight's program about Lost Haverhill, Birchbrow, and Thomas Sanders. And we'll end the show with a photograph taken in 1910 of Birchbrow in Haverhill, Massachusetts. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Jay.
Oh,